Okay, this is part 6 on my series on the history of Russian Germans. Basically, this is the 1920s, and during this period of time, the Soviet Union had a policy of promoting non-Russian nationalities within the Communist Party and state structures, promoting the culture, particularly the use of language, and of course, a Sovietized version of the culture, particularly construction of the history within the various titular national political units, starting at the village Soviet and going up to the Soviet Socialist Republic. Now, the Volga Germans received one of the earliest national autonomous territories, the Volga German Labor Commune in 19th October 1918. And this was under Lenin, of course. But the policy of Korenizatsiya, of taking root indigenization, really doesn't get underway until after the 12th Party Congress in 1923. And the Volga German labor commune is upgraded to an autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic on 20th of February 1924. Now, the Volga Germans are the only diaspora nationality to receive a national autonomous territory of this level. For other groups, the highest level they receive is on the oblast level, most notably the Jewish autonomous Soviet Social Autonomous Oblast. I'm sorry, the Jewish Autonomous Oblast established in Birobidzhan, but in reality, it's not too relevant because very few Jews ever move to Birobidzhan. But of course, the Volga German ASSR is the largest concentration of ethnic Germans in the Soviet Union, about a third of the total population of Germans. And then there are 11 smaller national rayons established for ethnic Germans in Ukraine mostly, but also Crimea, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Siberia. Now, all of these territories, as I said, promote the language and culture of the ethnic Germans, newspapers, schools, various other forms of media. But of course, the Volga German ASSR is the most significant of these. So by 1939, there were about 370,000 ethnic Germans living in the Volga German ASSR. And they had 446 German language schools with 117,000 students, 4 teacher training colleges, a pedagogical institute, number of houses of culture, clubs, newspapers, theaters, a central museum, library, and archives in the capital city of Engels, named after Friedrich Engels, the collaborator and financer of Karl Marx, author of the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital. So there was quite a bit of building of German language institutions to promote a Soviet style or Sovietized German culture among the Volga Germans, and to a lesser extent this occurred in other German populated areas in the USSR during the 1920s as well. Now, culturally, this was fairly successful, we can see, as far as the building of institutions. But in terms of promoting German communist, not successful. Very few ethnic Germans in the Soviet Union joined the Communist Party. In part, this is because they were very religious, and the Communist Party was openly atheist. In part, this was because of their traditional way of life, farming on private farms, uh, within these religious-based communities centered around churches. Again, the problem of the atheist policies of the Soviet government, the promotion of the League of Godless, membership in the Communist Party, basically requiring a support of these atheistic policies among a very religious population. So the number of Germans joining the Communist Party and being promoted in the Volga German ASSR state was quite limited. And other regions of the Soviet Union had much more success. One of the reasons that I alluded to earlier, that for instance in Kyrgyzstan and Central Asia, there's a lot more success. While the Soviets are officially atheist everywhere, there's much less pressure in some senses upon the Islamic regions overall than against the Christians that are non-Orthodox, Lutherans, Catholics, Mennonites, etc. Mainly because there's a very large number of Muslims in the Soviet Union. So Islam and the Russian Orthodox Church are always treated after an initial repression, but particularly on an individual level by the communists coming from their own ethnic groups as well, on a kind of with the more delicate hand, because the numbers of people involved are so great. So there is an Islamic uprising in Central Asia in the 1920s during the time of the Civil War and a little bit later, which is suppressed. But there is less repression against the Russian Orthodox Church and against Islam than there in the Soviet Union than there is against the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church, and the Mennonites, where the clergy and the other peoples involved in religious services are ruthlessly repressed to the point where they almost completely eliminate the religious leadership of these faiths within the Soviet Union during the 1930s in particular. But it's already starting in the 1920s, and there's already resistance, which will eventually fade as they lose. But it's one of the reasons why they are unsuccessful in promoting indigenous German or titular German communists in any significant numbers during the 1920s and 1930s. The numbers are much smaller than percentage-wise than many other nationalities. But nonetheless, we see particularly education and cultural institutions quite a bit of accomplishment in the Volga German ASSR. But I don't think they ever create this idea of a Volga German Soviet nationality the way it is successfully created among the nationalities in Central Asia, like Kyrgyzstan. Particularly because we'll see later, the Volga German ASSR doesn't last past 1941, and the distinctions between Germans based upon geography in the Soviet Union end with the mass deportations and dispersal during the Second World War. But that's all in the future. At this point, we're entering a silver age for the ethnic Germans in the Soviet Union, both in terms of promotion of German language culture, theater, radio, music, ethnography, newspapers, book publishing, But we're also entering a silver age in terms of economics. 19, but it doesn't last very long. By 1926, the Volga German ASSR has overcome most of the damage done to the economy by the Civil War. But already then by 1928, the beginning of forced collectivization of agriculture in the Soviet Union, which disproportionately affects the ethnic Germans in the Soviet Union, being accused of kulaks and forcibly deported to special settlements in the far north, the Urals, Kazakhstan, Western Siberia, and then later, of course, the Holodomor in Ukraine, artificial famine in 32-33, after the collectivization of agriculture, leads to massive starvation among ethnic Germans as well as Ukrainians. And that is a subject we'll deal with in probably the next video. But the other thing I want to talk about in the 20s, large part because of religious reasons, not just promotion of atheism, but also conscription into the Soviet army, taking of oaths. The Mennonites in the Soviet Union, in particular, reject Soviet rule, even though there is a benefit for them in the autonomous districts in Ukraine. Some of them are predominantly Mennonite, and there is promotion of Mennonite culture and support for Mennonite economic cooperatives at this time. But there is first, during Soviet times, emigration movement in the 1920s, organized by the Mennonites to leave the Soviet Union and go to Canada and other countries in the Western Hemisphere. The last batch go to Paraguay. And this is organized mainly by B.B. Yance, Mennonite leader, and they persuade the Soviet government to allow some emigration out in the 1920s, so they do not have to remain under Soviet rule. Again, the primary initial destination for this emigration is Canada. And so in 1923, there were 4 organized Mennonite groups of almost 5,000 people. And in 1924, another 4,000 Mennonites leave the Soviet Union. And both those groups, so almost 9,000 people, go to Canada. But in 1928, it becomes illegal to emigrate from the Soviet Union. And there is a demonstration in Moscow in September 1929 of some 15,000 Mennonites. And this persuades the Soviets to allow one last movement out. A little over 5,460. So the exact number here is 5,461 Mennonites are allowed out as a result of the demonstration, and they go to Germany via Lithuania and Latvia, and then they end up going to Brazil, Canada, Paraguay, and Argentina. So in total, from 1923 to the last migration in 1929, some 20,000 Mennonites leave the Soviet Union. And again, most go to Canada, but in the last wave, a number go to Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. And this is around the same time that we're seeing the beginnings of forced collectivization, which starts in 1928 and really gets underway with the mass dekulakization, deportation of people accused of being kulaks, rich peasants exploiting their neighbors, to areas of confined internal exile in 1930. to 1931. So I'll leave it at that. We will continue with collectivization in the next video, but I wanted to get through the era of Korenizatsiya and the development of the Volga German ASSR, the autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic, and this brings it up to about 15 minutes, so just about perfect. So until next time, when we deal with collectivization and the Ukrainian famine, auf Wiedersehen.